You don't need to be a celebrity to be a podcaster. What you need to be is a storyteller. Someone who thinks in audio because you want to create an experience for your listeners. Like using music to make a point. Or planning the story arc of multiple episodes. Or taking a 2-hour interview and distilling it to 20 minutes of key insights. If this sounds nerdy, well, it is. We talk to experts who can nerd out about a topic, and we get nerdy about production too.
I'm Mark, and I can make people sound like they're in a car,
at a basketball game,
even in outer space.
Carl here. When I'm not working on the business side, sometimes I get to record music for our audio beds.
I'm Pam of the Philippine Daily Inquirer. With Puma Podcast, I dug through 30 years of our archives to write the award-winning True Crime Pod Super Evil.
Ako si Macy. I started out as a junior producer. Now, I produce and host my own show.
Puma Podcast kami. Kayo na rin!
Asia 21, I would say, is a global family of dreamers and thinkers.
Very diverse individuals who are individually quite accomplished.
People that when you meet them, you get inspired by them.
Incredibly smart, but incredibly humble people
that are working on some of the most pressing issues in their respective countries.
Who have a common heartbeat about making this world a better place, not just by their own strength and their talents, but by the ability to work together.
I am Asia 21.
Mama Asia Viseka Sangdane
Na Asia 21.
Asia 21. Ma Asia 21.
我是亚洲20年
私はアジア。
Hello, kumusta? Ito po si Robbie Alampay ng Puma Podcast. Kung nanonood kayo ngayon, siguro gusto mo rin ng pagbabago. Ang tanong, paano nga ba? The late Chito Gascon dedicated his life to defending democracy and human rights. Although many people, especially the younger set, know him as the chairperson of the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines, he started his career as a student leader, as a youth organizer. He had a strong and abiding faith in reform and in the power of the youth to make it happen. It's in this spirit that our organizations have come together, Asia Society Philippines, Puma Podcast, and Bukas Conversations for Action. You're watching kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, the Chito Gascon Leadership Series. In each episode, you'll hear from a luminary who has led the way for their generation, and then a panel of the next generation leaders, the next generation change makers who will discuss the challenges we are facing today. To set the tone for today's conversation, we will welcome Senator Risa Hontiveros. She was elected to the Senate in 2016. Senator Risa is currently chairperson for the Senate Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality, known for her tireless work in promoting public health, women's rights, and the welfare of the Filipino family. She's a multi-awarded public servant, community organizer, journalist, a contemporary of Chito Gascon, a proud one at that. But, like I said, this is not going to be a traditional panel. I might as well bring in everybody else who's going to be joining us. I want to introduce Sabrina Gacad, Executive Director of Lunas Collective, and Rica Cruz, CEO of Unproved, and Ami Swanepoel, Founding Executive Director of Roots of Health. Welcome, everyone. Happy to be the token male in our conversation. But let me just start off with a question. But I will invite Senator Risa, of course, or Risa, to start, jump in with an answer. Let me start with, we're talking about women, no? And empowered women, and reforms for the women's sector. Let me start with, in your lifetime, how much has changed for women? Let's start with the one with the longest lifetime so far.
Sige na
Senator
nga.
Risa, sige.
Well, I guess, Robbie, and your sisters who are here, maybe every generation nating mga babae could say na in my lifetime, a lot has changed, but a lot still remains the same and still needs to change. I feel like mula nung generation ni na mommy, nagbago halimbawa yung pagtingin sa pagkakapantay-pantay naming mga babae sa inyong mga lalaki, Robbie, in terms of appreciating the work that we do at home and also having the equal right to work outside the home kung bahagi yun ng aming pagkatao, both as members of families and as individuals with our own passions and advocacies in life. Pero kung ikumpara ko yung generation ko and then yung generation ng mga daughters ko, kasi 3 of my kids are young women, wow, meron silang mga nasisilip sa horizon that my generation still has to walk further towards, or as you reminded us, Robbie, the late great Chito Gascon said, our generation still has to pound the rock on. Yung generation ng mga younger women, they're so aware and passionate and engaged about, for example, the broadest possible of gender equality, especially in terms of SOGI, yung ecological activism nila, kahenerasyon talaga nila si Greta Thunberg. And ang keen talaga ng sense of justice nila. I mean, our generation claims that also, but I think they're also surfacing new aspects of that fight for justice.
Risa, very quickly before we bring in everybody else, no, and we'd like to encourage everybody to just jump in, but only because you mentioned your daughters, you mentioned yourself, you also mentioned mommy.
Yes.
From what you appreciated growing up and seeing of your mom and your titas, and for that matter, maybe go as far back as your lola if you want.
Yes.
But what about them? I mean, how much did you perceive actually changed in their appreciation, understanding, and claiming of the role of women during their time?
In a way, yung mga lola ko at kahit si mami at mga tita, in some ways, they were ahead of their time. At least dun sa circle nung pamilya nila, nung clan nila. They expressed more of their strong personalities as individuals who happen to be women. Pero meron din sila mga kwento na ang bigat din talaga dalhin, bakahin yung convention or hamunin iyon. So that's why I started by saying na siguro kahit sa generations nila, they would say that they've come far but they still had further to go. Pero naiwan na lang sa generation namin, and lalo na sa generation ng mga daughters ko, the younger women here, to see and walk even farther. But bringing all of us women along, at sana sa suporta ninyong mga lalaki din. Well, all individuals of whatever soji.
Ina, Amy, Rica, I don't know kung you will say kinagisnan ko na tong yung whatever you're enjoying now and still probably have to fight for. But as to Risa's point, obviously a lot has changed. And I know, but how do you see it? Has anything changed in your lifetime?
Does anybody else want? I guess I'll just jump in. I mean, I think a lot of things have changed. Yet, as Risa mentioned, there are a lot of things that are still kind of the status quo. And I'm sure Doc Rica will also touch on this. But when it comes to sexual and reproductive health and rights, there are so many things that have gotten better. You know, it's much easier to access contraceptives now. There are more opportunities to get information and education on sexual health. You know, there have definitely been a lot of steps forward. You know, Senrisa's recent win of raising the age of consent. Like, there's tons of things in sexual and reproductive health that have improved. But with that said, a lot of the stigma around conversations around sexuality, a lot of the taboos that existed before are still very much present today. And in some ways, I feel like it might almost be a little bit harder because some people expect na dapat wala na yun, right? Na dapat in this day and age when we have so much more openness, that these things wouldn't be issues anymore. But they are. They are still very big problems. So I think it's definitely great to applaud, to take a moment to, you know, we did this with the Arhan 20th anniversary that just happened recently, the 20th anniversary of the Reproductive Health Advocacy Network in the Philippines. There have definitely been gains. But with that said, there's still a lot to do.
Rica?
I actually agree with what Risa said and Ma'am Amy said. Madami pa tayong kailangan gawin. Pero sa kaugalian ng mga Pilipino, no, kaya kong sabihin na kahit yung mga kababaihan, that recently, mas nagbubukas na yung conversation on sex, especially sexual pleasure, because that's what I know, that's what I'm researching on. At nakakatuwa yun kasi nung nagsimula akong magsalita about sex publicly, mga 2015, 2016 yun. Tapos may discourses around sexual pleasure. Ang daming nagagalit sa akin, madaming nahihiya pa rin, madaming nagtatanong. Pero ngayon, kapag lumabas ka dyan, ang dami ng shows, parang nagtitake na siya ng mainstream platform. Kaya nakakatuwa siya. Kaso nga lang, syempre, katulad nung sinabi nila, madami pang tatahakin. Kasi yung mga nagsasalita nito, yung mga nagsasalita about sexual pleasure and sexuality of women, sila yung may kakayahan na magsalita. Sila yung may confidence na magsalita. Sila yung nakakuha ng tamang edukasyon, kaya kaya nilang magsalita. Pero madami pang iba na walang ganitong parang access na ganitong edukasyon, confidence, kakayahan. Yun ang ating kailangan tahakin.
Ina, what do you think?
Yes. Idadagdag ko lang din, the whole idea of being a woman, di ba? Parang through generations, each generation would have like the ideal woman character. And today, ang nakikita ko rin with interactions with my own students, interactions online lalo na, there is this really strong desire to revisit what it means to be a woman. Tapos yung paglalagay ng napaka-personal na experience sa pagkababae or sa pagkalalaki, and then being able to choose alin dito sa pagkalalaki or sa pagkababae, yung traits na gusto ko as a person. Tapos alin dito yung traits na palagay ko ay bumubuo ng inner sense ko of who I am. And I think a lot of the young people online now have that kind of very strong, passionate attempt to define who they are based on sexuality. So ang magandang makita kasi is how does the rest of society catch up with that desire na hindi na lang enough na may kahon sa pagkalalaki, pagkababae, sa proper expressions of paglalande or pagkaka-in love or pagkakagusto with anybody, diba? Dito kaya meron tayong strong advocacy for SOGI, kaya meron tayong strong advocacy for the protection of people who experience gender-based violence. Kasi nakikita na dun sa personal experiences yung kaya na ng tao mamili. Saan ka masaya, feel your pleasure, and then paano mo i-defend kung saan ka masaya.
But Risa, beyond rights, I mean, other than rights, I just want to ask, I mean, on the personal experience side, you can imagine these young women, not just in this panel, but everybody nakahalubilo mo ngayon. You have millennials on your staff. And you can imagine how they act, how they behave, how they talk, how they will also push back and draw lines and so on. And nabanggit ni Ina, di ba? Parang it's not just how we see ourselves, it's also how men have had to change their own mindsets also. But throwback tayo to grade school and high school. If you grew up in this kind of a milieu and yung mga kaibigan mong lalaki, but how would the conversations have been different, do you think? If you grew up
in these times. Well, although I was a very shy child, I also grew up in a family na kapag magsasalita ako, kahit mahina ang boses ko, titigil sila makikinig din. So I always felt I had a space. Even among my boy cousins, kahit sa mga tito ko, kay daddy rin, sa mga kapatid kong lalaki. Well, I had the advantage of being panganay. Ako yung manang. So kailangan makinig yung mga dalawang bunsong lalaki. And ganun din, in school, yung mga teachers at mentors ko, they always made me feel na kapag gusto kong magsalita, that I had the right, like any other student, kahit sa kolehiyo, nung co-ed na yung pinag-aralan ko. So, I guess I wouldn't have felt like a fish out of water kung ngayong panahon ako lumaki. Baka mas madali kong natutunan yung maraming bagay, mas mabilis kong na-internalize. I think it might have made me feel a little bit, it might have made me feel shy a little bit longer kasi parang mas mabilis ngayon yung mga discoveries at yung mga revelations sa isa't isa. Pero palagay ko matutuwa rin ako. And since I'm experiencing it vicariously through my daughters and younger women friends like Sinasab, sobrang natutuwa ako, Robbie, na de-delight talaga ako sa karanasan nila.
But Risa, parang siguro, I guess there's a certain privilege there, di ba? Growing up, I mean, my impression is
middle class,
growing up, middle class, educated family. And not only that, I mean, I would presume a progressive thinking family all around you. But to everybody else, di ba? Ami, Rica, Ina, we take for granted. We started with, malaki na ang pinagbago. Pero kayo, when you were in high school and grade school and within your families, how did you experience it? Or how did you see it in your circle of friends also, where if you grew up even in a progressive family also? But how did you experience it growing up?
Robbie, I was actually going to jump in and say that I think even when you are in a progressive family, there are still influences sa society na minsan hindi mo na lang marirealize are influencing you. And my example of this is that, my parents are super progressive. My dad taught at UP Diliman for 40 years, my mom at Ateneo for 30. She was Sen Risa's teacher. Very progressive, very encouraging, very open about everything. And I never once felt pigeonholed because of my gender or my sex. Yet, my mom tells me that when the people power revolution was happening and we were always talking about Cory, that at one point, when somebody mentioned the fact that Cory was a woman, She said that I just looked at her so incredulous, and I said, "You mean Cory is a girl?" And that was like quite a shock for her. And for me, like, even in a family wherein everyone was super supportive, and I was 8 years old at that stage, I had internalized somehow that if you're talking about a leader, you must be talking about a man, right? So I think na kahit na progressive, I mean, obviously it's great if families are progressive, or if people can find their circles that
But
allow them
where
to
do
be
you think that was coming from? I'm really curious. For an 8-year-old girl to presume that, ay, Cory, lalaki yan. Where do you think that came from? TV?
Well,
What?
I do remember watching a lot of Eat Bulaga, but I think it's just, in Filipino schools, my husband is not Filipino, and he's always surprised na kahit bata pa, may elections, may president in the class, may PRO. He's like, "What's a PRO?" But
Sergeant at Arms.
yeah, exactly, diba? May mga ganyan. And I don't know, maybe, I went to UPIS for elementary school. I don't remember that it was only boys who were the leaders. In fact, I do remember many of my brilliant female classmates being as well. So I truly don't know, but it kind of shows how easily that kind of idea can permeate, na kahit na very aware and very progressive, hindi mo man lang ma-realize kung bakit ganun yung influences.
Yeah. I came from UPIS too. I came from Ateneo, grade school. Then I went to UPIS. And I have to say, I relate ako doon because I was put in my place immediately sa UPIS because all the officers in class and for this, were in fact the girls. They were the ones who were nominating each other, raising their hands. They were more confident in reciting and so on. And coming from Ateneo, parang the first impression I had for girls was actually mas assertive sila, like kaya Rica, Ina, how was it for you?
Ako, UPIS din ako. Tapos,
hindi to sadya.
UPIS din ako. Tapos yung nanay ko nasa academe din. I came from a family of academicians and she used to be a dean there. So, progressive din ang kanyang pag-iisip. Kaso nga lang, Sagrado Katoliko kasi ang aking tatay. So, kami yung nagsisimba ng 6 p.m., 6 a.m. araw-araw. Ganyan. So, lumaki ako na in a very conservative family. But setting that aside, kwento ko lang dun sa UPIS at saka dun sa ginagawa ko ngayon. Talagang UPIS. Siguro yung experience ko na lang. Nung 10 years old pa lang kasi ako, meron ng parang tawag sa akin yung mga kasamahan ko sa UPIS. At yun ay Pookie hostess. Tapos growing up, yung mga upuan doon tsaka sa banyo, di ba madaming vandal doon? Meron nakakita na Rica Pokpok. So siguro, dinala ko na lang yung pagkataong yon. And then, parang siguro sinabi ko na lang, okay, fine. Kung ganyan naman ang tingin nyo sa akin, might as well, parang, reclaim that name or reclaim that bansag, and I did what I'm doing now. But I think it came from the fact, yung bansag na yun, it came from the fact na bata pa lang ako, I was really talking about sex na. In high school, I would give out condoms, ganyan, and I'm a very sexually active person. Tapos, yun din, Robbie, maingay ako eh. So, ako yung assertive. So, baka lang na one way to counter that was to say these names about me. So, ganun ako lumaki.
Wow, but so it was bullying. I mean, you breathe through that as if okay lang, parang I claimed it. That's such a quick, parang you don't just breeze past that, and because at that age especially. That's not what it was about. It was bullying, and I have to say I can relate to that coming from the other end. Young people can be so mean, and especially young boys. And I'll take this time to come clean on that. you're right. We need to apologize to yung mga ka-generation because in our batch, may mga ganun din na ang bilis na bansagan, and we think it's just vandalism, it's just idle, we're happy to see everybody grow up strong women like you, but at that moment that was bullying without breezing past the fact that you claimed it and you turned it into your own personal victory. I mean, if you don't mind, come back to that age, and what does it mean the first time you see something like that?
Paiiyakin mo ba ako? Therapy ba ito? Joke lang. No, the first time kasi actually, hindi pa nga siya naka-anchor dun sa pagsasalita ko sa sex. I remember very vividly, I was singing in front of the school, yung flag ceremony. I was in the blue Sunday dress, and I was singing Colors of the Wind. Pagbaba ko, may lalaking tumawag sa akin, Pookie Hostess for Pocahontas. Wow. And it started there. So, doon natin makikita siguro kung paano tratuhin ng isa't isa nung mga oras na yan, nung mga panahon na yun, depending on gender. Yung mga bata, parang tayo in itself. Pero masasabi ko naman na through education, sana wala nang ganun.
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna say, Ina, I mean, you can jump off
Unfortunately, it's still...
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say it still happens now. I don't know if it's as mean as what was said to Rica and as uncalled for, that hindi talaga related. But before COVID, when we used to be able to teach reproductive health in high schools all over Palawan, and anytime na may babae na may tanong tungkol sa tinuturo, so whether it's about sexual orientation, gender identity, or contraceptives, especially contraceptives, kung may tanong yung mga babae, the boys immediately make fun of her. Na immediately they'll say, "Oy, may balak," and it shuts them down. I have seen so many girls just be shut down by words like, and that wasn't even an attack on her as a person. That was just saying, "Uy, may balak ka ba?" And of course, the because it's still so stigmatized, kung may balak, that obviously means you're a bad person. But it still happens, unfortunately. So definitely something we have to keep in mind.
Ina, go ahead.
I was just listening, and kasi one of the prompts for preparing for our session today was yung question ng paano mo ba gagamitin ng feminist theories para maintindihan yung nangyayari sa lipunan. And I can't help but say, like, ito yung clear manifestation kung paano our society believes, number one, pleasure is trivial. Hindi siya mahalaga. And you actually have to work for pleasure, di ba? Parang you get good grades and you get to do a Jollibee trip or movie trip or may reward. So pleasure, number one, is trivial. Second, you have to deserve pleasure. And then there are certain pleasures na hindi pwede. Like women's pleasures, enjoying their bodies, diba? And women actually just being curious. And then yung domination, naka-built-in kasi, diba? Kung nakikita mo sa bata, built-in dun sa psyche na you are meant to dominate people as young boys. You are meant to use pleasure as a way to get entertainment. And I was just thinking about my own experience growing up na parang medyo similar din kay Rica na one of my parents was conservative and that was my mom. Tapos yung dad ko yung liberal. They sent me to a liberal school and I felt na on the one hand, hindi ako ever held back in terms of achieving. In fact, I was celebrated for achieving things which put this other pressure, diba, to perform and be perfect, which I'm going through therapy for. Pero yung other side was, always every time I tried to express desire or yung sinasabi na paglandi, I was always shut down as wag mo gagawin yan. Hindi ka malanding or hindi ka maarteng bata. So yung contrast ng you have to be rational, productive, intelligent, versus you are a feeling human being that has desires and pleasures was always parang at odds for me. So parang growing up, I found a way to make another expression of it through movement, dance, ganyan. And until like I was a lot older, I was trying to balance yung pleasure and fun nung, okay, I can move in my own body, no one can say bad things about it. And yung desire ko to achieve things. So parang, yun yung tricky na parang why can't pleasure and productivity go together? Bakit yung isa mas nakakababa ng pagkatao? And bakit yung isa mas reason for people to be controlled and dominated?
Yeah, you mentioned the word Ina I was aware of it, I guess, but I never really used that as a framing. But you said just the curiosity, di ba? Parang and I immediately jump into stereotypes and of our roles of domination and so on. But just the curiosity, it's so simple, and you're right, di ba? Parang boys are obviously curious and they start experimenting, di ba? And they start pleasuring themselves. And you're right. Why can't it be as simple as that? Girls are curious as well, right? But when we invited Senator Risa to talk about empowerment of women and changing, of course, I thought about RH law. We thought about how do you effect change that way, and then we're thinking about the big things in society. We're thinking about church. We're thinking about religion. We're thinking about how does that impact on the politics at the local government level, and so on. But I want then to start off on that conversation about reform, starting with where we started off. Let's just talk about how much of a challenge is the not even cultural, just the individual behavior of people, how we grow up as boys and girls, and how do you think that impacts as deeply or even more profoundly than even the big macro forces in our society?
Well, I've always believed that everything good, also everything bad, but everything good talaga nagsisimula sa pamilya natin, sa tahanan natin. So, like what I always call Ina Sab kasi I met her as Sabrina. So, pero like what Ina was saying, no, it relates to how we are socialized as children and how we as parents socialize our daughters and our sons, how therefore following on the family and the home are other social institutions, schools and teachers as supposed to be partners of parents. Yes, the churches as well, faith communities, media itself, government too, from local to national level. How we, going back to the schools, how also we educate, how we school our students, whether girls or boys, and of whatever SOGI. As difficult as the political and economic changes are, halimbawa legislation, yung RH law na tinrabaho natin over a decade and a half, yung pagtatrabaho natin ngayon, for example, ng LGBTQIA plus community ng SOGI Equality Bill for only one generation already, 2 decades, 20 years. Yung nabitin itong 18th Congress na dissolution of marriage, no-fault divorce bill. As difficult as the political and economic changes are, siguro yung pinaka mahirap minsan, pero siguro pinaka importante, susi, the cultural changes. They're rooted in the personal relationships within the family, within the home, and they need to be supported in all institutions, kahit sa policy-making institutions natin, so that we can create that more conducive environment na bawat individual, pwede nating, yung sinabi din ni Ina at ni Doc Rica, madiskubre yung sarili nating pagkatao and live that out, live ourselves out, who we are, who we love, how to find the joys and the pleasures and the delights in being human. So,
what do you think? What just sticking to this, and then before we go, signal really a conversation of what it takes to to lobby for stuff, to institutionalize change. I'm just curious, when you look at your circles or even the larger society, naisip ko lang to because the other day I was watching Friends on Netflix and I hadn't done that in a long time. Diba? But
90s kid ka
you
talaga.
watch Seinfeld. You watch Seinfeld, diba? I will go even further. You watch Seinfeld. You watch the old sitcoms. And even something as recent as Friends. And even my kids who are only in their 20s said, actually, you can even watch something as recent as How I Met Your Mother.
Mm.
And not to mention sitcoms to this day in Filipino. Diba? Even Tagalog sitcoms. But really, you can imagine Palibasa Lalaki when we were growing up. And it's shocking. Diba? Parang it's shocking. You can even go back just one decade and you'll be shocked that, whoa, I don't think they can get away with that today. Diba? But if you take it back to how much things have actually changed, what do you think people can no longer get away with? Men in particular, in your own, in your person, just in your personal circles.
Yung personal
Anyone?
circle, yung personal circle ko kasi very select and very not regular. Parang hindi ka na, at least in my personal circle, hindi ka na pwede mag-mansplain. Alam mo yon? Or kung magma-mansplain ka, meron ng magsisikuhan ng, oy, tingnan mo ginagawa niya, tapos feeling niya, yung lalaki, na nag-explain ng napakaraming bagay, hindi niya expertise, di ba? Feeling niya siya yung expert. And all they had to back them up was Google or Facebook. So, may ganon. Meron ng maliliit na challenge. But that is my personal circle. Definitely, hindi na rin papasa sa personal circle ko yung pagmamaliit ng tao based on their gender identity, sexual orientation, or yung choice nila ng pananamit. As in, parang gusto mo maging hubadera by all means go. Hindi yan kabawasan sa pagkatao mo. But I'm also acknowledging na yung aking personal circle is very different from the norm. So, yon. And I anticipate that the norm still allows for people to be slut-shamed, di ba? Yung panulit bullying dahil nagsulat ka ng paikli.
Ikaw, Rica, fast forward to that bullying episode and how people see you now. I imagine people not only are more consciously progressive, but actually careful around you. Are they actually intimidated by somebody like you now?
Maybe the men, because I still because I still have experiences of men trying to control me, and I'm not talking about my partner. I'm more talking about the workplace. This is what you should do. This is you should do yoga. I'm like, I don't want to do yoga. Coming from a man,
Na-hurt kami ni Ina. The joke lang.
Meron silang parang I find peace. I'm okay. Meron silang mga ganon na you should follow our lead. And I'm like, I already said I don't want to do that. So merong parang imposing of control over a woman who's whom they may be intimidated of or who they may see na parang have more power over them, pero hindi naman talaga because we're all equals. Meron akong mga ganong karanasan, but thankfully not in my current relationship kasi iwan ko siya talaga. Para sagutin ko yung tanong mo kanina na in my personal circle, meron din akong experience na dun sa daily TV show ko kung saan tayo magkasama, Robbie, merong nagkakaroon na parang sexist remarks pa rin. Kunyari, kapag sinasabing kabet, babae agad. Parang ganon. So, nilalabanan ko yun. Nilalabanan ko yun. At alam mo, kahit na hindi maganda pakinggan ang sinasabi ko, alam mo, may mga kabit din na lalaki kasi pwede rin kaming magkakabet. Mga ganyan.
There's an interesting insight that si Erica File, the data scientist, as you know, also an Asia 21 young fellow from whatever, she shared, and we actually did a podcast about that, where she said, we take our language as, we're so proud, our language is gender neutral. But sabi niya, but the culture is not. And the proof of that is yan, Rica, sabi niya, if you take that sentence, yung kanyang kabit ay ganyan, or lumabas ang kanyang kabit, or nanood ng sine ang kanyang kabit, di ba? If you put that through Google Translate, it's going to be a she. it's going to be a she or it's going to be a mistress. It's not going to be gender. And it applies to other things as well. Kung sabihin mong ipatranslate mo ang siya ay abogado, it will likely come out as he. Kung sabihin mong siya ay sastre, it will likely come out as she. Anyway, just wanted to throw that in there because it's fascinating. But I wanted to therefore bring us now to that. Given all of this, how hard is it to fight for reform? I mean, Ina, you were with Luna's Collective, and Ami with Roots of Health. You work with women at the grassroots, down to the individual level, and so on. What are you finding are the difficulties for you?
I was gonna say, si Ami nag-recommend sa akin ng isang sci-fi feminist book. And she's a robot, and I'm like, oh my God. But what I'm finding, the institutions of support for sexual and reproductive health, for gender-based violence, they are very basic in the sense na they will adhere to yung lahat na nakalagay sa protocol. But they will not go a step farther to say, let's examine the culture and the attitudes among our staff. Diba? Parang in terms of reproductive health, it is still so common na parang lalo na kung teenager ka na nagbuntes, tapos may 3 kang anak, pupunta ka sa health center, yung mismong health worker ay i-judge ka ng bakit ka nandito, ang dami mo ng anak, ano pang kailangan mo? Diba? So, yes, they will provide contraceptives, yes, they will provide care kasi nakalagay sa RH law, they have to do it. Yeah. But the quality of care that we are providing is so poor. And we forget that care is a matter of dignity, that care is a matter of personal well-being, diba? So, pasok tayo sa standards ng batas, pasok tayo sa protocol, but the quality of care is just poor and lacking.
So even these things, like for example, we take for granted, we have institutionalized, for example, women's health desks and women's desks in police stations, in barangays, in government. So you're saying, oh, sige, my desk, but the personal experience there is still largely dictated by culture.
Yes, increasingly umu-okay, diba? Kasi there are initiatives to include gender sensitivity, tapos orientations on trauma-informed, survivor-centered care. Pero largely still, if you wanted to complain about domestic violence, paghaharapin yung mag-asawa, pagbabatian. Well, that puts the survivor in a very vulnerable position kasi hindi naman nila kaya mag-no doon sa perpetrator.
Yeah.
So yun yung mga nuances.
Before we bring in Ami again, Risa, dun sa mga ganyan, so when it's mandated, for example, diba, the barangay can bring people together. How far does the training actually go, and what to their mind, to the barangay captain's mind, because he or she wants to do good also for their community or for this family, but in their mind, are they trained on, and what is their mindset when they say, let's say, may domestic violence, and for any reason you need to bring a couple in? Ano yung mindset typically ng mga officials natin?
Well, tulad ng sa anumang community organizing, we always begin where we people are. Kaya laging dapat top of mind natin, very conscious talaga tayo, yung mga kultura na pinanggagalingan natin from which we act. Kaya kailangan ng interventions natin, tulad ng sinabi ni Ina, it are also culturally sensitive and responsive and engaging. And in the same way na sa bawat hakbang sa legislative work, critical yung participation, yung guidance ng mga civil society organizations, any private sector organizations na supportive, and then as well government at every level. Pati dun sa pagbatas na yon, yung oversight na ganap at maayos na ipinatutupad iyan has to be sustained. Hindi pwedeng, naging RA na yan, okay, goodbye. No. We have to see are the barangay captains and other officials and volunteers at the barangay level continuously undergoing this gender sensitivity training and experience and transformation para sila mismo sa personal nilang buhay at yung serbisyo sa komunidad, talagang nagiging useful sa kanila yung batas, and they are also able to use it to serve and support their constituents. And that goes to say also for all the other stakeholders sa ganyang mga batas. And it's only if we're able to implement any progressive law more fully and more properly na mas may substantive basis tayo na i-assess siya after a few years, and then based on that assessment, amendahan, i-repeal, magkaroon ng mas maayos pa na batas, again based on the lived experiences of the people at yung pagtatasa nila mismo na is this still what we need now, and then how do we take a step forward, lalo na sa usapin ng gender. Siguro yun yung sa maraming tanong ng buhay natin, yan ang pinakatanong sa buhay natin, because who we are when we're born, who we become, sobrang central even sa usapin ng citizenship and governance.
Yeah. Ami, ikaw, what do you see on the ground na, napapailing ka pa rin? Something that maybe you understand where it's coming from, but it still either shocks you or it still makes you shake your head.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't shock me because it just happens so often. But, following up on what Risa was saying and what Ina mentioned, there's a lot of trouble with implementation of laws. And actually, Ina was talking about, provider attitudes, na baka bigyan ng service yung bata or babae because of the RH law, pero hinuhusgahan, they're shaming her, they're making her feel bad. But that's at least giving the service. There are many here in Palawan who don't. And the thing is that so much of it is changing the attitudes and changing what is acceptable culturally. And the good point is that you can do that, and that's one of the things Roots of Health does, is we do trainings for barangay health workers and rural health unit staff to change their attitudes, to make them see that if they want to reduce teen pregnancy, kailangan bigyan nila ng serbisyo yung bata na lumalapit sa kanila instead of shaming her. But the thing is that, I don't know, maybe they don't intend to do this, pero sa trainings, they say, okay, we get it. And then they do the post-test and you see improvement. And then we send secret shoppers. We have youth advocates who then go to the barangay health centers after people have been trained to see if they get services. And some do, but many don't. And many, are told by the very same people who say they understand na kailangan nilang bigyan ng serbisyo. Some of those same people will say, bumalik ka na lang pag buntis ka na.
Oh my God.
Like that's actually something shocking that was said to one of our youth advocates. And it goes back to the attitude din kasi it's, what's interesting about that secret shopper situation is that different health workers that we had trained discriminated against different girls. One of them was dressed provocatively. She has dyed hair. She was dressed very sexy. And she was, talked down to na bakit ka ganyan, ang landi mo, ganyan. Or even if they don't say, she felt it. She felt she was being judged. But one of the other girls was, she's Muslim. She was fully clothed. She has glasses. Mukha siyang bata. And I guess that's what they took issue with. But, she was not like quote unquote slutty, but she was given also judgment and discrimination and was basically told like, bakit ka ganyan? Hindi ka naman, bakit ka humihingi ng contraceptives na parang ang bata-bata mo pa. So it's just, there's a whole lot that has to shift culturally. And part of what we're doing is trying to say to health workers or implementers na, even if you don't like their behavior, even if you don't condone it, even if that's not what you would do or what you want your kids to do, you're obligated as a health worker to provide those services.
If you could put if you could put a number, a percentage, of ano yung, sa secret shoppers nyo, nakikita nyo na, parang kakatrain ko lang dito parang yung iba nagbago, yung iba hindi. If you could put a number on that, what's the success rate?
Well, on that, it was 2 out of 6. 2 out of 6 health centers did give services and were very open. 2 of them just outright said, we're not gonna serve you, like you're too young, or bumalik ka pag buntis ka na. One of them said that they didn't have the contraceptives available. So maraming dahilan eh. If they don't want to provide a service, maraming dahilan. And this is something that Senrisa was saying about reviewing laws and going back to them. Like, one of my advocacy points for this year is trying to get DOH or POPCOM or whoever is the governing body to start measuring how many young people are on contraception. Because if you're not
we don't even have that baseline.
Then no. It's not something that is measured. We measure how many women of reproductive age are on contraception. We measure how many how many prenatal screenings a pregnant woman gets. So because you measure those things, those become the targets for the healthcare workers down the line.
Correct.
So you have to, if this is something we really want to do, which all levels of government have said, yes, we want to reduce teen pregnancy, we've got to start measuring how many young people are on contraception, because then that becomes a goal. Then if a young person comes in...
Wala pa ako dun sa goal, nandun pa ako sa baseline. Yung Senator Risa, how do you advocate for reproductive health if you didn't even have a baseline? I mean, what was the baseline that you started from? Presumptions. And that, Risa, about the process, let's say, of pushing for, let's say, RH. Well, that's what's the baseline to start from? Whether it's data or its attitudes.
And that's why years ago in the RH law, nandun na yung comprehensive sexuality education. And all along this time, sinasabi natin, dapat evidence-based ang policy making. So commonsensical na lang ito na if you are government worth your salt from the local to the national level, ika-craft mo talaga yung targets mo based on, again, like in organizing, where people are now. Ano ba yung data about us that's meaningful, nagagabay sa gobyerno, hindi lang sa governance in general, but delivery of social protection and per sector and per subsector. So yung sinasabi ni Ami, that should be hindi na kailangan nating i-advocate dapat. So it's another one of the many points on which we need to improve our implementation of laws.
Go ahead. In terms of data, kasi paborito ko talaga yung RH struggle, as in with Risa, with everybody. Para siyang party. Masaya makipaglaban kasama ng women's movement. Kasi equal parts party, equal parts laban siya. But I wanted to say, in terms of data, and this is funny kasi tama rin yung point ni Ami, let's start making it a target for people to be on contraceptives. Kasi right now, ang mini-measure, or nung time ng RH, ang mini-measure was people's unmet need for contraceptives.
Yeah.
Diba? Yung hinayang, ang mini-measure ay yung hinayang na sana hindi ako nagbuntis. Ang gusto ko, yung family size preferences ng women that they would have wanted just 3, but they have 5 or 8. And Guttmacher was saying, this is where the unmet need for contraceptives is, and that is why it's a good legislation to have yung RH law. Pero yun nga, parang ang mini-measure natin ay yung hinayang ng mga tao. Yung nakaranas.
The bare minimum.
Diba? And then you wanted to implement a law based on everybody's hinayang, but why can't we not start with what do people want today? Diba? Yes, teenagers want love, connection, mutuality, respect, and yes, sexual connection. And it's not a bad thing, diba?
Not at all.
It really
it's good stuff.
Yes. Yan ang aking sinasabi talaga, no? Sex is really good and it can give you a lot of benefits, your emotional health and mental health and well-being. Meron akong datos dito pero galing ito sa private sector kasi kasama ako ng DKT ngayon dun sa kanilang Do It Right campaign. Hinanap ko talaga yung notes ko. Ang nakalagay dito, sa ating bansa, 40% of women in relationships, not necessarily in marriages, use contraception. Pero malaking porsyento nito ay hindi galing sa gobyerno. galing sa private sa NGOs.
Mhm.
So, parang doon sila pumupunta. Tapos, 68% yung oral contraception. Parang 9.5% lang yung condoms.
Okay.
So, yun yung datos na meron ako.
And we're talking about this in the context of our age, but expanding it a bit, Ina and Ami and all of you, to all other things, diba? Gender-based violence and so on. How much do we actually understand?
Very little.
Really?
Alam mo, ang Pilipino, and this is so common, people love...
Idagdag ko lang to. So for example, going back to that interface with the barangays, di ba? Are we even capturing that data?
Gusto mo malaman kung paano nila kinakapture? May notebook ng mga barangay.
Okay.
And then, once the notebook is filled, the barangay will file the notebook away.
Yeah.
So, it's just incredible. And I was fascinated in like a research way na parang everyone who asks for help will speak with a women's desk officer, and then they will take properly, diba, anong nangyari, what is your complaint, what do you want us to write and record and document. And then the documentation is manual, notebook. And if the person needed that statement or that proof, kasi sa court naman ang hinahanap nila or sa mga legal processes, what they want to see was the track record of the survivor having sought help.
Wow.
And if you didn't know that as a survivor, iiwan mo yung notebook at yung salaysay mo sa barangay. And if you needed track record, babalik ka sa barangay at i-request mo yung person, pakihanap. Diba? And like, how does the person tell anong page yung salaysay na yun? So even that is quite primitive, diba? I was just saying yung importance ng building the survivor's identity, not just as someone who experienced violence, but also as the person who is seeking help and taking action to change their situation. So part ng building their identity is making sure, girl, ito yung dokumento mo. May kopya ka nito, certified ito, at kahit saan ka magpunta, pwede mo itong dalhin to prove that meron kang track record of having sought help. Diba? And some of the cases we've heard about was what if lumipat yung survivor sa ibang barangay or sa ibang munisipyo. Tapos isustalk siya ng perpetrator niya. All over again, it's a new process, zero track record. Panibagong salaysay, panibagong notebook. Diba? And that's difficult because survivors are doing their best to manage the situation and achieve whatever it is that they desire. Pero yung systems,
And Robbie, if I may just add, as possibly the most old-fashioned person here who still writes notes by hand in a notebook with ballpen, okay lang sa akin yung notebook kung proactive yung government natin at all levels na based on the evidence na dapat kinakalap, proactively gusto talagang pigilan or i-prosecute at parusahan ang violence against women and children. Kung each and every entry in the notebook, Diyos ko, wag nang intayin na mapuno pala, proactively kilusan na in partnership with the victim survivor.
I just want to prompt this forward in. So what do you do? I mean, we're talking about pounding the rock, diba? When you're faced with these things and you're literally, let's say, you don't have the data. So figuratively, what we're saying is you don't even know where to strike this rock, diba? So what do you do? What are the approaches? What are the strategies to at least, have an edge in pounding that rock?
Ako, by experience with Luna's Collective, and magto 2 years old kami this year, our strategy has been to, number one, promote messages of care. Tapos we wait for the people whose parang interests will be piqued by that kind of message. And you just trust the market. Well, no, we don't kasi we also do Facebook advertising. So we also play the market, diba? Pero yun yung demand generation strategy. The goal is to look for the people who need the service.
Yeah, but I was gonna ask, I mean, and this is good, no? Parang as specific as we can get. How you say you propagate that message, how do you get that message out? Facebook?
Right now, we're doing Facebook advertising. I know sina Ami are also using TikTok more proficiently. And yung online spaces kasi, and it has been recorded in the National Demographic and Health Survey, younger people, younger 30 down or 39 down, use online spaces to look for information about contraceptives. So if they're there, we have to be there too.
Ami, kayo, anong experience nyo? And then Rica, in using these different platforms to reach out and at least let people know that, you know.
Yeah. Well, we have a big Facebook presence, and our clinic has 100,000 followers. And even before COVID, would get questions about reproductive health from Pinays all over the world because all of the information is in Tagalog. So, that's one of the learnings is we have to have, there's a ton of information about gender-based violence, about reproductive health, about all things related to sex and sexuality online in English. There's less available in Tagalog. So Tagalog is important. Our team, my team that is very young and tech savvy, are using TikTok, like Ina mentioned. Some of our videos on implants and other things have literally millions of views and hundreds of thousands of likes and shares and comments. And we have staff who answer the questions. And then so many of the comments, whether it's on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok is our biggest one now, so many people say, salamat sa pagsagot. Kasi walang sumasagot.
Can you describe a bit the videos for those of us who are, honestly, I know TikTok, I've tried it, I've installed it 4 times, I've uninstalled it 4 times because I'm intimidated because I don't understand what's going on. But could you just describe both the content that you produce, what does that look like, what works, what's the video look like, and what's the interface?
So I am totally fraudulent in describing this because I have an account to follow Ugat ng Kalusugan, which is the Roots of Health account. I follow our one account. But, a lot of people use, Robbie, I think the TikTok videos you mentioned are like when people are dancing or doing something in line to the music. But you can also make videos. And so like one of the top ones that we have millions of views on is a video of one of our clients getting an implant put in. So it's literally like just a video of her coming up to our clinic, coming up to the window, someone like injecting her with the anesthesia and then inserting the implant. And but you can also upload other videos onto the platform. So like there's this online resource called amaze.org that has sexuality cartoons for all ages on all issues relating to sex and sexuality. They're super cute. We got funding this year from the Austrian Embassy and from the Australia-New Zealand Association to dub those into Tagalog. So we've selected, I can share them. They're great. We've selected about 30 where we've dubbed them into Tagalog with a professional company in Manila, and we've put those on TikTok, and we have them on our website, and those get a lot of views as well. So with TikTok, with the interface, like original content gets seen more. So those homemade videos, I think, get the algorithms, they get seen more than like the videos that we upload do. But I believe you can do both. But I could be wrong because yun nga, hindi talaga ako masyadong marunong sa TikTok. But I do know from what my colleagues say that young people are not really using Facebook as much anymore. And they kind of see Facebook as our generation, their parents' generation's platform. So, masyado na daw matanda ang Facebook. Masakit, no? Because literally, I'm like, okay, I am like officially old because I don't understand this younger system. Like I look at it and I'm like,
Ganun ba yun? Does that make us officially old?
I think so, unfortunately. Pwede naman yung at heart lagi.
Ikaw, Rica. Ito si Rica, social media star to eh. I mean, we'll treat you as an expert here. I don't think that anybody here's a problem. But, yeah.
Parang sinabi mo, in-uninstall ko rin yung TikTok, once upon a time, kasi hindi ko talaga kaya. Pero gusto ko lang sabihin, Amy, that it's really good that you're dubbing amaze.org because that's the site that I recommend to parents for age-appropriate sexuality education. So excited ako for
I'll share the
your
link.
videos. Yeah. Pero yung gusto kong sabihin kanina, ito sa mga challenges ng aking ginagawa. Kasi katulad ng sinabi nyo, you have Facebook ads, you have TikTok ads. Alam niyo ba, ang dami ng parang videos na ginawa ko on sexual pleasure ang nasasara na ng TikTok, ng Facebook, even Instagram. Instagram lang yung medyo mabait sa akin. And then they do not allow any ad that talks about sexual pleasure. So even if it's contraceptives, even if it's condoms, if you are framing it in a sexual pleasure narrative, no, they will reject it. They will put it down. So
and yet they
and
yet they don't crack down enough on.
I mean,
on
I imagine
sexual abuse.
Have you tried to figure out why? I imagine maybe the social
it's
media.
It's really part of their community guidelines.
Yes,
I'm part of the Femtech Association of Asia, and we put up parang, what do you call that? A letter. Actually, to Mark Zuckerberg. Medyo siya. Medyo big thing at saka suntok sa buwan na yun ang aming nirereklamo kasi even kunyari menstrual cups or apps that talks about pleasure pero it's about women's health, talagang pinapatay nila. Hindi pwede. Kasi parang isa dun sa mga sinasabi is sexual pleasure is too much of a narrative for sexuality at the moment.
And here's an example of something that we never even considered 10 years ago or 15 years ago. That technology, algorithms, these digital platforms is a battleground now as well. We were just thinking about it in terms of broadcast media. Then there's a discussion about regulation of content on free and so on. But now, even within the digital platforms, the algorithm is something that we need to be transparent about. Imagine, Rica, kaya ako tinatanong, kasi imagine maybe even in the most high-tech companies right now, the only way they screen is text-based. Diba? It's based on the title and it's based on the comments, much like YouTube, diba?
Bawal ka nga magsulat ng sex na as a word. It has to be like asterisk X or
What?
Madami
Hypocritical considering they don't crack down as much and enough and adequately against yung talagang kunyari online sexual abuse and exploitation or human trafficking. Wow.
Or disinformation and political
mismo trolling and fake
diba?
news.
Pero sexual pleasure bawal.
Tabu.
Nakakainis. It is dangerous. Dangerous for men, actually.
Global. You talked about femtech. You talk about femtech, and you're lobbying, and you're writing position papers. You're writing to Mark Zuckerberg. So this is not just a local issue. I imagine this is a global.
It's not a local issue. It's a global issue. Talaga. So makikita mo kung gaano pa rin kahirap to put the message out there that sexual pleasure is a right.
Okay.
Diba? That we deserve that equal access to the narratives of pleasure, how we will be able to enjoy ourselves and our bodies.
Wow. Time check lang. We're already running a few minutes over time. If you don't mind, we apologize and we still thank you for your time. Okay, just to go for another 5-10 minutes, if that's okay. But I'll prompt it with heading into that towards to help us to try to bring this to a point. Yung sinabi nga natin, the title of this program is Kung Gusto Mo ng Pagbabago. And as we said, this goes to what Chito said. Kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, wag kang tumigil, di ba? Pukpok lang ng pukpok. And as he said, when finally something cracks, it is not the final strike that made it crack. It is all the strikes that you may have even forgotten. Strikes in moments of frustration, strikes in moments of victory, and so on. But I'd invite you to complete that sentence. Kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, ano?
I'll go.
I will go. Sige, go.
Sige. Kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, simulan sa sarili. And also, vote for Lenny and Risa.
Salamat!
Yes, idadagdag ko lang. Kung gusto mo ng pagbabago ulit, kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, and I will say the most millennial thing possible, find your pleasure. Tapos maghanap ka ng mga tao that will share that pleasure para you work together. And also remember, pleasure kasi when it is shared, expands its coverage and then it gains more power. So that is something that I want people to remember. Tapos kabahagi ng pleasure ay care or pag-aaruga. And because we want to share pleasure, pati yung responsibility ng pag-aaruga ay dapat na sinishare din natin. At finally, kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, maghahanap ka ng leaders na may ganong qualities na nagsishare ng pleasure at pag-aaruga. And like Ami said, that's Risa Hontiveros, that's Lenny Robredo. In the spirit of mas radical magmahal, di ba? What is the power signature of the leaders you are electing? Is it the power signature of love or is it the power signature of domination? And I hope it is love.
Amen.
Ikaw, Rica, kung gusto mo ng pagbabago.
Ako, kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, hindi ka makikipaglaban. Iintindihin mo kung nasaan ang mga tao and you move with them. You move alongside them. Kasi kung kakalabanin mo sila, wala kang mararating. Diba? So, kailangan mo, katulad ng sinasabi natin kanina, kailangan natin intindihin ang ating kultura, kailangan natin intindihin kung ano ba kung saan sila nanggagaling, at saka mo maiisip at maiintindihan kung paano mo maipipresent sa kanila itong parang pagbabago na isinusulong mo. Pero hindi mo sila aawayin. Hindi ka makikibaka sa kanila kasi more resistance will follow. And ganon. At kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, syempre katulad nung sinabi nila, hindi ko pwede sabihin dahil media tayo. Yun na lang.
Kasi ang bait ni Doc Rica, ako nakikipag-away pa rin.
At kung
sige. I was just about to say, it's really not about fighting, but moving with the people, moving with others, and understanding where they are.
It's finding a common ground, with them.
Ayun.
At kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, gaya ng laging sinasabi ni Chito sa atin, huwag kang padurog sa bato. Kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, tiisin pero indahin din at subukang tunawin yung bato sa gallbladder na napakasakit. Pero tumungo ka sa kalusugan at ano ba yung pleasure sa Pilipino. At saka bliss, follow your bliss, sundan ang iyong bliss. At kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, baguhin natin yung komposisyon ng batong ito kasama ng ating mga kadiwa, mga kasama sa paglalakbay para ang bato ay maging lupa kung saan pwedeng umugat tulad ng roots of health, ugat ng kalusugan, ugat ng lahat ng mabubuti para mamunga ang ating lipunan, lalo na para sa mga susunod na henerasyon. Sabi lagi ni Chito, hasta la victoria siempre. At sa mga kadebate natin, dun sa mga hindi natin mahanapan man ng common ground, pero mas marami na mahahanapan natin. Pero yung talagang kailangan tutulan, no pasaran, sabi ni Chito.
Pero I'd like to thank everyone. We're wrapping this up. I'm supposed to synthesize this, but I'll still let Risa have the final word. But I'll have the final question pa rin. Because when you talk about, Risa, the certain victory that we promise each other. And even when we go back to what Chito is saying, to keep pounding that, ang tagal. You're talking about hanggang sayang malaking bato ay maging parte na ng lupa. Oh my God, ang tagal. And this is a question I asked also Ted Te in the first episode of Kung Gusto Mo ng Pagbabago. What's your perspective on time? Meron bang kung gusto mo ng pagbabagong mabilis? Meron bang kung gusto mo ng pagbabago kaagad? And if that's not a valid question, what's your perspective on time? What's your perspective on the time it takes? Knowing all your victories and all your moments of frustration also, we don't know if the May elections will be a moment of victory or a moment of frustration. But if it turns out to be a moment of frustration as well, what would you remind people? Na kung gusto mo ng pagbabago, this is what you have to understand about time.
Wow, what a question. Well, nung malapit ng maging presidente si presidente, I felt na nagbe-brace tayong lahat na makasurvive nitong mga susunod na taon, lumaban ng maayos, tapos mag-repair ng damage pagkatapos. Kaya medyo unbelievable, frustrating and exhausting yung prospect na umulit lang ng katulad na period. I'm still full of hope, full of fight in that hope, pero I guess kasi di naman natin kontrolado lahat ng bagay. Even if it takes a little longer, dati sinasabi ni Ed Garcia na nothing is impossible. It just takes a little more time. At kami, tayong mga kababaihan, sa sarili nga naming laban bilang mga tao na pinanganak na babae, whatever our soji, we will wait and we will fight as long as it takes. Mapapasa amin din, mapapasa atin din. But I don't know if Roby, if I can just, the ones who will outlive us, maybe the youngest woman here, si Sab, si Ina, maybe she, if you don't mind, if she could have the last word.
I learn from the best. And about sa time, di ba, dito papasok yung science fiction eh. But really, it can't be about us. The movement for change cannot be about one person. Kasi we will continue to stand on the shoulders of giants that have done so much more. And then the succeeding people who will join the movement and maybe stay or not, diba? At the end of the day, it's about consent. It's about pleasure. If they want to join and stay, go. If not, go on with your life. Pero yun, that time, it's a nice thing to take account of. Pero never think that it is an individual's failure if the change doesn't happen in your lifetime. Kasi that is so punishing. And it's just not good for you. But even more importantly, because change is a never-ending process, diba? And it's always going to be a bunch of forces trying to dominate each other. So with that in mind, find the people, choose the giants, and then run alongside them, stand on their shoulders, and then ask for people to join you as well.
Maraming salamat sa pagbabahagi ninyong lahat. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. Thank you to everyone on our panel, Ina Gacad, Ami Swanepoel, Rica Cruz, and of course, Senator Risa Hontiveros. And thank you everyone who's watching. If you found this useful, please share it with a friend and abangan ang susunod na episode ng Kung Gusto Mo ng Pagbabago, the Chito Gascon Leadership Series. The highlights of our last episode with Sheila Coronel are now available in podcast form on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Just search for Kung Gusto Mo ng Pagbabago. Maraming salamat sa Asia Society Philippines, of course sa Puma Podcast, and sa Bukas Conversations for Action. Maraming salamat po sa inyo lahat.